Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about kind of a daunting statistic that's a little depressing, that 60% of men under the age of 30 are single, and many of these men are not even interacting with women at all. Now before I begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. So we do have a playlist here on Catholic dating, Catholic matrimony, and whatnot. And I think the closest episode that I've done in the last 3 years that kind of correlates this is how the rise of MGTOW, or men going their own way, has affected Catholic matrimony. And so there's been some studies, and certainly you can Google these studies, about how there's been a rise in the last 10 years, but certainly post-COVID, there's been an accelerated rise of involuntary celibates, otherwise known as incels. You might have heard of this term before, kind of in a negative or pejorative connotation in terms of like men who have done, there were some shootings, like for example, back in Canada, maybe 5 years ago, and one of them was a guy who was a self-proclaimed involuntary celibate. As the name would suggest, it's going to be somebody who would like not to be celibate, somebody who wants to be in a relationship with the opposite sex, or I guess the same sex as well, but can't, or just can't, doesn't have options, can't find somebody. And so when you look at the statistic that 60% of men under the age of 30 are single, what does this mean? You know, there's a lot of ramifications of this, and it's not like the majority of these men are like Lothario, Don Juan Casanovas that are betting a bunch of women, as they would say in the manosphere, kind of like the Chads or the Tyrones. Most of these guys are not Chad and Tyrones. These are well-intentioned men who would like to be in some sort of relationship, but for whatever reason, they can't. And why is this? Why has there been a rise of it? I think a lot of it just has to do with just so many factors at play from the past. You've seen the cultural Marxists, their tools, how they've effeminized the man and masculized the woman, how they've pitted the sexes against each other. Originally, of course, they pitted the classes against each other, right? Workers of the world unite. And then they pitted the races against each other. And then the last 50 years since second wave feminism, they've pitted the sexes against each other. And then they've inverted them in the classic Hegelian dialectic to effeminize the man. And you see this played out in so many male role models that we've seen on television in the last 40 years, like Homer Simpson, right? You see the incompetent dolt man kind of being led around by the much smarter but kind of naggish wife. And if you look at shows back in the golden age of television, the 50s and 60s, it wasn't like that at all, right? The men were masculine, they were quiet, but they were reserved, and the women were more feminine. Then you see this flipped around. So then you see this generation, if not two generations of men who really haven't had strong masculine role modeling. And then you compound this with the rise of no-fault divorce in America. That was legalized first in 1970 in California, and how essentially you sneeze the wrong way, you can get divorced upon. And so you've seen how prior to no-fault divorce, if there was a divorce, you had to prove a fault, prove a reason. And when you successfully did, it was normally men who were the ones initiating the divorce, normally to remarry. They weren't going to leave and just be bachelor men. Normally they were going to remarry because they wanted to marry a younger woman. And so the reward was that the first wife would get alimony, because women as a whole weren't working back then, and they would get the children and child support. And since you've seen the rollout of no-fault divorce in 1970, it's women who disproportionately initiate divorce. If you look at the studies, a lot of them show that it's close to 90% if the woman is college educated. In other words, if there's a divorce in a marriage and the woman is college educated, 90% of the time she's initiating it. And in general, it's about 70% of the time a woman is initiating divorce. And so you've seen a couple of generations of men maybe not growing up with a father, not having a father figure. I think that plays a role in it. I think both of these lead to maybe, along with some other factors, maybe social awkwardness that some men in their 20s and 30s have today. And that social awkwardness, I think, definitely plays a role in their inability to find somebody. You also look at just the more, I guess you could say, shallower reasons. We are the most overweight and obese we've ever been in human history. And I think both men and women, the average woman is 5'4" and 170 pounds. average man's that much better. So I think that probably hurts as well. And then you look at like what has happened since, especially post-COVID, it's just the rise of the internet world. And it's no doubt the internet world existed before COVID, but you see this generation of men, like their whole life is on the screens. Either they're gaming, or they're watching porn, or they're on OnlyFans to get their female interactions. And so their whole immersed world is there. And so there's not as much of a motivation to be out trying to date in the rigors and difficulty of dating, because dating in itself is difficult, right? I like you, you don't like me. Somebody likes you, you don't like them, right? It's a big mix and match. It can be difficult. So a lot of that is stressful, and a lot of that is very hurtful, right? You can date somebody for 2-3 dates or 2-3 years, and it doesn't work out. So it's hurtful. So in some ways, men go to the sanctuary of the virtual world, because the virtual world you can't get really rejected, right? So you'll see men who are just on porn all the time. You'll see men that are just spending a lot of money on OnlyFans or on waifus or whatnot. They can kind of escape into this virtual world where they don't really need to interact with the world, much less women. And so I think this has led to a major problem as well. There was a study that came out of England not that long ago, maybe 5 years ago, about how 50% of British men under the age of 30 have secondary impotence or erectile dysfunction. And they attribute that mostly to pornography. Because when you're in that world of pornography, it's very hard for a woman with her bodily flaws or personality flaws to compete, so to speak, with those virtual women. So when men get an opportunity to be in that situation, some of them can't perform. And so you see all these things kind of lining up where there's just a lot of men who are, and I don't want to generalize all men for sure, but there is a stratum of men who are kind of in this sketch or delineation that I've made. Now, how does this affect marriage or Catholic marriage? Well, of course, this is not good. We've seen in general how marriage rates have dropped, cohabitation rates have increased, fornication rates, if you want to use the proper term, have increased. You've seen that the age of first marriage has stretched older and older with every given year. We used to get married, back in the day, it was like as soon as the woman had her first period, her menarche, she'd be married, 16, 17 years old, because back then it was later, because they didn't have the calories. But even not that long ago, if you look at the 1950s, 1960s, couples were getting married at 21, 22, and starting families and having jobs and all these things. And I think there was more of incentive for a man to marry, whether he was an involuntary celibate or a man who has options, so to speak, because for the typical man, if you look any time prior to the sexual revolution, for them to get sex, they had to get married. And if they got married, they would marry a virgin. And now with the advent of sex-positive movement, sexual revolution, only 5% of women are virgins when they get married. And some women who are watching this might be like, "Oh, Gregory, don't shame us." Well, look, I'm going to be honest. The majority of men would prefer to marry a virgin if that was the choice. And so you see this kind of world where, the old saying, "Why buy the cow if you get the milk for free?" And I'm not saying women are cows. I'm just using the metaphor. That now that women are putting out the most they've ever been, the most promiscuous ever in human history, the motivation for a man to marry is little, because women are willing to give up the sex and they're willing to cohabit. So what's the incentive for the man to marry? Or eventually, marry quickly instead of doing like this 6-year, let's live together, and okay, maybe I'll marry you. There's not much. Or if you look in 1950, if a man wanted to get sex, he'd have to marry a good girl. And so a lot of the girls, not all the girls, you could think of Pinky Tuscadero from Greece. There were girls out there who were loose, but the majority of girls were chaste and virgins at the time. But now that women have kind of fallen for the lies of the cultural Marxist sex-positive movement, which every study shows is bad for women. The more sexual partners a woman has, the worse it is for her mental health. Now that they've fallen for this, it's kind of led to damaged women. And there's a great line kind of in the manosphere that says, men who hate women because they don't know women, they're not with women. And women who hate men because they've been with too many men. And I think there's a certain truism to it. With the rise of the manosphere, there are men who just hate women, but really it's just a smokescreen and a cover for the fact that they are sad that they can't get a woman. And so you see how the Tinder hookup generation that we're in now hasn't helped either. It's just all this like getting further and further from the gospel, and the classic definition of marriage has really hurt men and women, and as an extension has hurt society, because what is society made of? Families. And when the family is damaged, society will be damaged. You look at the humongous rise of illegitimacy. We're over 50% now. If you just look at all of Americans, if you look at certain races, it's even worse. So I think that the fact that there's a lot of men out there who are living in this kind of virtual world of involuntary celibacy is sad, and it's daunting. Now, how can it be fixed? I really don't know. You know, with the advent and the increasing acceleration of AI, and with waifus, or like really elaborate sex dolls, and other factors, I don't know. It's going to be very hard to get a lot of these guys off of that world, that addiction to that world, and back to being around women. We've seen that teenage pregnancy rates have dropped. That's a good thing, right? But it's not because like the typical teenager is finally listening to the Catholic teaching on sexuality. It's because there's not a lot of men or boys for these teenage girls a day. And you hear this common lament by high school girls and college girls, like, where are all the guys? The guys don't want to go out with us. And you can say why the guys don't, right? They don't want to get hurt, or they don't want to spend money, they don't want to go jump the hoops when I can just go home to the perfect girl, so to speak. So I think there are well-intentioned, good Catholic women, Christian women in general, who want to marry. And I think they also hate the sex-positive movement, because the sex-positive movement has put pressure on good girls to not be good, right? Because they want to get the catch. Now, what they define as the catch is a separate question, but let's say there's a guy with good moral, good character, good looking guy, whatever, ambitious. And all these women are throwing themselves at them. And if they know that, again, this is the most promiscuous women have ever been, a lot of these women are just putting out, you're going to have good, well-intentioned traditional Catholic women who might feel pressured to do things they don't want to do because they think that that's what they have to do to get the catch, because there's just less standards today in general for both men and women, and there's just less high-quality men because a lot of men are just opted out into this involuntary celibate world or this virtual world. So I really don't know how to fix it. I think all these statistics are daunting. The fact that less people are getting married, I think that's pretty daunting. Yes, there's definitely risk to marriage, and I would say probably more for men than women, because when women initiate divorce, the man can lose the kids and they can lose all their money. It's just, I get why men are opting out, but I would say in general, this is not good for society at all. But I honestly don't know how to fix it. You could do some reform in the judicial system and make divorce harder, not impossible, but harder. I think that would be great. Of course, teaching Catholic couples when they're going through pre-canon classes, the rigors and difficulty of marriage, and how marriage, we've talked about it before, how the Victorian era did such a disservice to marriage, because prior to the late 1800s, the idea of marriage was not about the pitter-patter of the heart. That was great. That was like a bonus, the love match, as they used to call it. But marriage before that was much more kind of like down to earth. We're doing this for continuation of property rights. We're doing this for continuation of bloodlines. We're doing this because this is what keeps society together. And I will learn to like you, or maybe love you. Like, think of like arranged marriages, Indian arranged marriages. That was kind of the mindset in the West for a long time. And then you see this the last 120, 30 years, how now it's all about pitter-patter. But the problem with that is if you go into a relationship where you have no values in common and it's just sexual attraction, well, that sexual attraction, of course, is going to wane. And as soon as you don't feel it anymore, I'm going to divorce you. And so, of course, that's a complete liability to children. Otherwise, this episode could go on and on and on and on and on, but I'd like to hear from you. Post in the comments. Are you worried about how such a large majority of men are singleless and not getting married? Until next time, take care. God bless.